We've got pretty massive World Eaters news today, because the Statline and Weapon profiles of Demon Primarch Angron have been leaked to the internet, and this guy really looks like he'll be living up to his name in brutal melee combat. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today we're talking World Eaters once more. We have had a fair few leaks on the channel already, which I've covered in previous videos, but one part that we hadn't really got all that many details on was Angron himself. Maybe a little bit odd, seeing as he's probably the single model that people are most interested in finding out more about. The rules leak this time has been posted on a few places, including Bolter and Chainsword. Not 100% sure what the original source was for this, but it does look like they quote a Discord server as well. And today's leak is basically a partial data slate leak with the profile for Angron and the stats of his main weapons. There's also a few other bits going over the options he has for his aura abilities. For first glance, I'd be inclined to say that these look legitimate. They do look pretty in line with what I'd expect for Angron. The format looks the same as the digital copies of rules that Games Workshop sends out to playtesters, and similar to ones that we had regarding the Tyranids and the Eldar earlier in the year. Obviously still not impossible that it could either be an early edition of the rules that gets some tweaks, or even a fairly high effort fake, but from the appearance of this one and the stats that Angron has, it looks very believable to me. I strongly suspect that this will closely resemble the final rules that we get, even if it's not exact. So let's get into Angron then, in all his blood-soaked glory. First up, for a bit of context on this, we already kind of knew that his points were 360. That was from the points leak that we had before. Previously I did think it was a bit dodgy due to the missing units, but given Games Workshop's previews, it really looks like that was legitimate now. In any case, he's listed with a power level of 18 here, which would fit perfectly with that. It's usually around about 20 points to 1 power level, so that does look very believable. I think 360 points had a few people surprised, as that will be quite a bit cheaper than his brothers. Magnus and Mortarion are both significantly more, even when they've had their points cut. I feel like for Angron it perhaps might make sense though. I think he's likely to be a much less of a synergy piece and just go and break things in melee. He's not exactly going to be giving his fellow World Eaters psychic buffs or things, and might even have slightly limited command abilities. He's more known to be a blood-crazed butcher than actually commanding his troops with any sort of tactical acumen. First up, we've got his stat line, a big 16-inch move which I'm sure will have fly as well. That will get him into melee very quickly and even threaten first turn charges if your opponent deploys too aggressively. He hits on 2s, has strength of 9 and toughness 7, 18 wounds, 12 attacks, leadership 10 and a 2+ save. A few interesting similarities and differences compared with his brothers there. It means to be the same toughness as Magnus and a bit less than Mortarion, as you'd probably expect. His strength of 9 is a bit higher than either of them, maybe not unsurprising, seeing as even those wings have biceps. 18 wounds puts him in line with his brothers as well. It does mean that he won't be able to hide behind obscuring terrain, so will get shot a bit easier than most, which admittedly probably is going to be his biggest weakness, whether or not he'll be durable enough to survive repeated combats and keep on fighting. He does have a 2+ save, and I would guess that he's almost certainly going to have a 4+ invul, the same as Magnus and Mortarion as well. So 18 wounds with that profile certainly isn't too bad for 360 points. Unless he's got further defensive buffs though, it's not enormously standout. Certainly if he gets something like a -1 damage rule, or 5+ feel no pain or anything like that, that would make him a lot more tempting on the durability front. We don't have that information yet, as we don't have his special rules section. Probably the single most standout thing on that profile though is a whopping 12 attacks, more than just about any other character in the game I believe. And he makes those attacks with 2 weapons called Samniarius and Spine Grinder, which all have one consolidated profile. If anyone knows which one is the axe or the sword, feel free to let me know down in the comments. Just in the name of the Samniarius one, it does sound like that could be some sort of bound bloodthirster weapon. Perhaps not too surprising for a Demon Primarch of Khorne. It does appear that he's equipped with just those melee weapons, no burning breath attacks or anything like that similar to the Bloodthirsters. He will be very much a one-trick pony, I guess, but admittedly it does look like he does melee rather well. With that dual profile for the 2 different weapons, he gets to choose between making attacks with 2 different profiles, either a skull-taking slash, which is his strike type mode, strength +5 so strength 14, AP -4, and a big damage D3 +3. Not what you want to get hit by when there's 12 or more attacks coming your way. I feel like perhaps the bloodletting sweep rule is maybe just as interesting though, if not more. This one's made at strength user, so strength 9, AP -3, damage 1, and each time that you make an attack with a weapon, it gets 3 attacks rather than 1, so triples your attacks to effectively 36 or 39 if you have the +1 attack from World Eaters. No matter which one of those he chooses, it's pretty ridiculous damage output. He's certainly going to have absolutely no trouble carving through hordes, which is kind of nice as you'd expect him to in the lore. Some of the bigger Primarchs and monsters and things can have issues with hordes just because they can't get that many attacks. He very much can, and he makes them all at strength 9 AP -3. Just for fun, I thought it'd be interesting to look at how much damage he can do. This one is purely based on this profile, no extra buffs whatsoever, as they're not 100% confirmed. From previous leaks though, it sounded like the World Eater's trait will be a +1 strength and +1 attack in the first round of combat, so typically strength 10 on that sweep profile, and 13 attacks or 39. It's certainly possible that he might have other different ways of getting more damage out of him. We haven't seen the rest of the rules on his datasheet, or whether he's got any way of giving himself rerolls. In any case, just on these leaked profile numbers, it does mean that he'll pretty much wreck most things that he gets in combat with. Against a couple of heavier targets, he's going to do incredibly well. Against a toughness 7 vehicle with a 3+ save, he averages 41 wounds, basically 100% dead, and he can afford to divide his attacks between different things. Against a toughness 8 vehicle with a 5+ invul and -1 damage, that's a drop down to 17 wounds, still should easily off something like a Plague Burst Crawler in a round of combat. And against infantry, that massive sweep attack adds up to 25 guardsmen, around about 8 dead standard Space Marines, or around 5 or 6 Terminators without additional layers of protection. Overall, the stats are pretty immense as you'd expect. Really good combat profile for a 360 point model, and particularly one that can move 16 inches bounding across the board and get into combat with what he wants. All that being said though, it's not impossible for him to run into issues. Unless he's got some extra special melee rules in the special rules section, then there's a few things that will get in his way. Damage caps like Catan or Abaddon the Despoiler will kind of ruin his day. It will just do the maximum of 3 and then stop. High invul save units are going to be a bit more of a pain. Anything that's got a 4+ invul save will tank a fair bit of that damage. Against most targets though, he should have enough just raw attacks to punch enough through to be meaningful, but it might just be a bit problematic if they layer it with other things like, say, a transhuman physiology type rule, meaning that you'll only be getting about half the amount of wounds. Say if he was charging in against a unit of Deathwing Terminators, he might just not do quite as well against them, only killing around about 2 or 3 on his raw stats, though as mentioned he could certainly have more getting rerolls or other rules. In general though, the vast majority of things really aren't going to want to be in combat with Angron. Otherwise, we do have a few more details. There was a bit of a Discord excerpt in addition to the Angron leaks datasheet, and apparently this states that he'll have the option to choose an aura in his command phase out of this choice of 3, and then have one of them apply until the next time he selects one. The first one, and perhaps the most interesting, is a 6-inch aura of no falling back for everyone. This means in theory that if you kill a unit in combat and then consolidate into a next one, then that one just plain wouldn't be able to fall back, no rolling or anything, and unless the enemy manages to countercharge and kill you, then you basically guarantee Angron's massive damage output in the enemy turn as well as yours, and likely another dead enemy unit. This could be absolutely brutal if Angron manages to get into the midst of the army against a shooting opponent, tag one unit, and then lock up the next, and then have him basically immune from firepower. Very, very scary. Otherwise, the two other options sound like buffing ones. There's one that says reroll melee hits of 1 whether they're within 6 inches of Angron. Not a bad buff, and if that is as de-restricted as it implies, then it would imply that Angron himself would get that rule, so it could make his damage output better as well as nearby allies. And then the third one, which is core units get +1 attack within 6 inches of him, so it amps up your things like Khorne Berserkers and stuff. I have a feeling that that one's probably just going to be a bit less practical to pull off in reality. It's a better buffing rule than re-rolling melee hits of 1, but I think is often going to be outpacing his other World Eaters. He moves 16, where it sounds like the rest of the Codex is going to be moving far less. Overall though, sounds like quite a cool rule to represent an aura of rage that no doubt surrounds him. Otherwise, from the previous rules leak, there were a couple of other rumours. Apparently there's a way to respawn him with that Blood Tithe mechanic, having him deep strike back onto the battlefield in your next turn sometime. Whether or not that turns out to be practical or not would probably depend on the fine print and what you're passing up to be able to do that. Obviously that sounds amazing though, if it's in any way practical. Returning 360 points to the board is pretty massive. As well as that, the Warlord trait that is rumoured to have is denying objectives secured within 6 inches, presuming there's anything left of course. While that's a pretty powerful rule if you can combine it with anything objective secured, it really might not be all that useful on him. I feel like he's usually going to have the damage outputs to clear most objectives, and if for some reason he doesn't manage to, then he might still be outnumbered unless he's got allies nearby, which he might be fighting solo a bit because of how fast he moves. Certainly not terrible, and I suspect he will probably have to be the Warlord if he's included, similar to other Primarchs, but maybe just something that's going to come up from time to time if he happens to be contesting an objective with one model as opposed to something else. Overall though, looks like rules that are pretty fitting of a Demon Primarch. Blood-soaked massive melee, very fast and pretty tough with a 2+ armor and 18 wounds. It feels like at 360 points that looks pretty usable to me. I feel like maybe his biggest disadvantages are getting focused down with enemy heavy weapons fire if he doesn't have any other durability rules. Let me know what you think though. At this profile, would he be strong or not? If you enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, while certainly keep the regular World Eaters news coming as we get it. I'm certainly looking forward to reviewing the Codex in 4 once it's out. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that links down in the video description if you're interested. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages. You can see certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.